a bunch of other ways that parents also help their kids, which sometimes you think of and sometimes you don't necessarily think of. But, whether that's, paying for education, maybe it's private high school, maybe it's university fees, maybe that's another massive one. Looking at, covering their rent for a period of time to help them save up for a deposit, or, what's also really common is letting kids move back into home. So
Welcome to 360 Money Matters, where financial planners Billy and Andrew talk all things financial planning. This podcast aims to increase your knowledge and confidence with all things money. Each week, they will cover topics such as investing, cash flow, budgeting, saving, passive income, debt management, and much more, so you can live a life on your terms without limits.
Hello and welcome back to episode 200 of the 360 Money Matters podcast. I'm Billy and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew. Bills, here we are, 200 episodes in.
That's snuck up pretty quickly.
Yeah, that snuck up real quick. That'd be about 4 years since we started.
Yeah, close enough to it, right?
Yeah, wow.
Fantastic. Good job.
Mate, you've put up with me for 4 years.
Well, our listeners and our viewers have put up with us for 4 years, so...
Exactly right. So they are the real MVPs in all of this.
And speaking of MVPs, thanks to our two mums for being the only listeners there.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you're right. No, absolutely. So look, without further ado, Andrew, let's get straight into it. Episode 200, what are we talking to everybody about today? It's not overly special in terms of what we're talking about. We just want to keep rolling and bringing our viewers a whole heap of value. What are we talking to everybody about today?
Yeah, so Bills, today we're talking about how do you help your kids without harming your own retirement?
Ooh.
Juicy topic, this one.
It is, and I must say we are seeing more and more of it, and without giving away or burying the lead here, a lot of it has to do with the property market and helping kids get into the property market, and we are seeing more and more of that, well, just generally speaking, but at this particular time of year, entering into spring selling, starting to see interest rates reduce. There's more of an appetite for property, and the national sport is picking up again. So it's not surprising that that this topic is now up for discussion.
Yeah, exactly right. And that's really the most common one, right? I mean, I wouldn't say, maybe not the most common, maybe the most thought of one is, gifting money for a deposit, or, loaning money for a deposit, whatever that is. But there's a bunch of other ways that parents also help their kids, which sometimes you think of and sometimes you don't necessarily think of. But, whether that's, paying for education, maybe it's private high school, maybe it's university fees, maybe that's another massive one. Looking at, covering their rent for a period of time to help them save up for a deposit, or, what's also really common is letting kids move back into home. So they've experienced freedom, they've realized that it's not all that it's cracked up to be, and they need to or want to move back into home in order to be able to save up for a deposit, and that's going to have a financial impact on the parents.
So just side tip, when they do move out, you sell the house and downsize.
Exactly.
So if they do want to move back home, you actually don't have a room.
Bedroom doesn't fit.
That's it.
Unless you're going to sleep in our room.
That's it. We sleep on the couch.
Yeah, exactly.
So look, in terms of what does that look like? So they're all common things that we tend to see. Thinking about this from a trade-off perspective. So if you make a decision as parents and say, okay, we're going to help our kids with X, whatever that may be, Andrew, you listed them before, thinking through what that does look like and then saying, okay, what type of impact is that going to have? And in this instance, we're talking about it specifically on retirement income or retirement per se. So yeah, you need to understand the financial ramifications of what that looks like. I think it's fair to say that for most parents, we want to help our children where we can. Getting that balance right between helping them and giving them a bit of a leg up, not helping them too much where they're not grateful for it or they don't have the work ethic. But then on the flip side, the trade-off conversation going, okay, we need to do this in a sustainable and a responsible way to make sure that we're not leaving ourselves short for our golden years.
Yeah. And it can be a difficult balancing act. It really can be. And I think that where it's not only difficult, but I would almost say impossible, is if you don't have your own retirement plan.
Yep.
Because if you don't know where you're heading, then you don't know what can be done with leftover money, and you're just kind of, sticking your finger in the air and testing where the wind is. I mean, how much money can you afford to, help your kids with a deposit if you don't know how much money that you're going to need in your own retirement? So I think that this ultimately starts off with, you need to know what your plan is, how you're going to get there, in order to be able to determine, hey, what's surplus and what can I help my kids with?
I think you've made a good case for getting some financial advice, Andrew.
Yeah. Look, I think it's massively important. Because first things first, knowing whether helping your kids is going to harm your own retirement is only going to be informed by having that plan there in the first place.
Yeah. Yep. No, absolutely. I think there's probably another thing just associated with all of that is, and once again, every family is different, but I've heard the saying when I talk to different people throughout the conversations that we have, is parents, and it's usually the ones who have a little bit more means, so they know that they can help their children without, harming their own retirement and stuff, is basically saying, hey, I'm better off giving it to them now when they need the help, as opposed to in 20 years' time when I'm checked out and our kids have gone through all of the difficult times of whatever it is, where the mortgage is at its highest and so on and so forth. So getting the balance right in terms of timing is absolutely critical. And if you, bringing this full circle, if we then compare that back to, say, longevity risk and saying, okay, if you give it to a child at this point in time versus at this point in time, what's the difference that it's going to have? So it may not necessarily be sort of two polar opposites, is the point that I'm trying to make. It may not necessarily be, I'm going to give it to them now and then I'm going to run short, or the opposite is saying when we pass away, that's when they're going to get everything. It might be a staged approach, and it could be, hey, we're going to give them a little bit of help now, and depending on what our investments do, depending on how expensive those business class flights are, depending on how expensive those cruises are that, all the retirees and stuff love to go on, then maybe we adjust how much we give at what point in time. So it's not a decision that you're making today. It's something that you're doing at points in time based on essentially what's transpired from a financial perspective. That's probably a smarter way of considering it, because it'll help prevent the longevity risk that we tend to see all the time.
Yeah. And understanding, what are the implications actually going to be? So how are you funding it? Is it going to be, hey, we're going to take early withdrawals out from superannuation? Is it going to be, we're going to delay our own superannuation contributions and the opportunity cost of that? Are you funding that via debt? Like, how is that actually going to be funded? And is it sustainable? Does it fit into your overall plan? Is it the best approach to be able to help support the kids is really important to consider.
Yeah. I think being able to say no as well too.
Yeah.
Sam accuses me all of this all the time, that I can't say no to Scarlett. Right? Anyway, that's it.
That is little girl.
Yeah, apparently, right? And she plays up on it as well too. Setting clear expectations, being able to say no, and doing that not only for your benefit, but sometimes for the child's benefit as well too, right? So what does that then look like? Being able to do that without feeling guilty, but it's just a way of setting boundaries and coming back to what we were describing before, not doing that to help your kids, but then it leaves you in a position where, in my experience, as we tend to see people get older, you tend to become a little bit more vulnerable just in terms of everything. You know, your health, maybe your money's depleting, you're not sure what's going on, you finish work, you don't necessarily have the ability to generate income and deploy yourself into the workforce again. So needing to be really clear on what that looks like. And if you do say no, doing it without feeling guilty and explaining that to your children, and hopefully they can understand that and understand your reasons behind it. And it's not because, you don't love them or you want to harm them or what have you, but they're adults, and at a certain point in time, you've got to put your needs in front of them. Yeah.
And I guess sometimes it's not just saying no. So sometimes my answer is yes, or maybe it's not even a question, and it's, I'm going to support you, but there's some requirements that I need to be comfortable with it in order to be able to do so. And I'll use an example of that. Just to see how far and wide this can stretch. Because, Digital Finance Analytics, they had done a study, and they have shown that nearly 60% of first home buyers get financial help from parents, right? So that's more than half, so hugely significant. The average parent contribution is insane, $90,000. That's huge. And this is average. And so, yes, there are some, numbers, on the far extreme end that are going to push this higher because, if one person on the very wealthy end gifts $500,000, well, the floor is zero, so you can't go negative. So that's going to skew things slightly. But nonetheless, 60% of first home buyers receiving financial help from parents, the average contribution from parents being $90,000. You can't understate that this is a really big wealth transfer. Now, anytime that there's a transfer of wealth, you have to understand that there are some risks that are associated with it as well. And, some of the most common ones, yes, you think about, someone potentially taking that money, yes, it's given as a deposit on a house, it all goes through perfectly, and then someone sells the property and takes the money and, blows it up the wall. Yes, there's some risk associated with that, and you hope that as parents you've instilled the right, type of actions in your children that they're not going to do something like that. And you probably wouldn't be gifting money if you thought that that was likely. But what about a spousal separation? Mm-hmm. What about, the fact that 50% of marriages end up in divorce, and there's $90,000 of your assets that you're thinking about, okay, can I afford this? Is this going to impact my retirement? Can I do it? You've gifted it. That's formed part of the asset pool now. And all of a sudden, in the event of a separation, potentially an ex-partner can get some of that money, if not all. But there's a huge risk that's associated with it. And so what do you do? Should it be a gift? Is it a loan agreement with, repayments that happen? And so that if there is a separation, there's, something where there's some recourse for a parent to be able to recover that money. Is it, hey, I'm giving you this money, but one of the requirements is that, if a spouse comes into the mix or with an existing spouse that's there needs to be a binding financial agreement so that I receive this money back in the event of a separation. But creating clear boundaries that aren't necessarily just no, you need to have those open conversations because, some of these statistics like this spreads far and wide.
Yeah. And look, it's becoming a bigger and bigger consideration for a lot of Australians as the cost of living increases. Saving up for a deposit is becoming harder and harder. Serviceability hurdles to try and jump through in terms of how much money you can borrow from the bank. Just going back to your point, Andrew, there is a smarter way of doing that. If you are thinking about, okay, gifting money to children, how do you then make sure, and it's terrible to say, but you can't deny the statistics in terms of giving them that money, but how do you then make sure that call it your investment is then protected, and to a certain extent and it's a bit of a stretch, and how far do you go? But you're also protecting your child as well too. So yeah, you can do things like loan agreements, binding financial arrangements is another way to do it. And I think ultimately what this comes down to, and it leads into our next point as well too, about getting kids involved in their own financial growth, having these conversations with children. And we're not talking children, adult children, having these conversations with them and basically being open and honest about what this looks like and basically saying, okay, this is what we're trying to achieve and this is what we're trying to prevent. And if, at least in my experience, if you're open and honest about what that looks like and you're reasonable in terms of the assumptions and what you're thinking about, I think it's a pretty easy conversation to be had. And ultimately, it's coming from the right place because on one hand, you're trying to help your child, you're trying to protect them, whether it's protecting them from themselves or protecting them from someone else. That's essentially what you're trying to do. So, there are ways to do it. I think, loans versus gifts, binding financial arrangements are definitely the case. And it's just being a little bit more strategic in terms of your thinking and potentially getting advice around what this looks like. Is a really big thing as well too. And it's becoming more and more common. And we're seeing it as we're starting to talk about this intergenerational wealth transfer, because you're talking about large sums of money that are getting transferred across to their adult children and the parents thinking through that and going, okay, where does my money go, what happens with that, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, exactly right. And I think that when you are having those conversations, having a discussion around how that money is given, what the expectation is, and what the best way to structure it so that it's beneficial for everyone is important, because there can be some tax consequences. There can be some ways to structure this that's right for your situation, whether that's, putting money into a trust and giving distributions, whether that's, pulling equity out of an offset account rather than owner-occupied property, but structuring things, pulling equity out of an investment property rather than owner-occupied property, but structuring it so that it's tax efficient, structuring it so that it's the right thing for your child. And I think that another, important takeaway in all of this is, and not necessarily financial, but putting barriers, saying yes, but with these conditions, but careful that you're also not dictating your child's life.
Yeah.
You need to marry this type of person, or you need to do X, you need to do Y. We've seen that. We've seen it happen. It doesn't make for a very good relationship. And, I don't think that it's necessarily a talking point for this podcast, because we're a finance podcast and not necessarily relationship advice. But, being careful around.
Actually, if you're thinking about helping kids and the impact that it has on your retirement, we've taken the approach that this is just financial. But if you take that scenario and basically say you've gone and blown your relationship with your child because you were too heavy-handed, and you've got grandkids and they don't want the grandkids to be part of your life, the impact that can have to somebody's well-being and retirement, or in their retirement years. So you could look at it from a different angle. But yeah, you're absolutely right as well too. You don't want to be too heavy-handed. You want kids to be able to learn and invest in their own financial growth as well too. So there's probably an education piece associated with this. What we try to do with the people that we're talking to is, if there's young adult children, we try to get them in to see us so we can have a conversation with them and just give them some tips around, money management and different bits and pieces. Everybody's different in terms of their level of knowledge and sophistication around this. But you need to be mindful that what you're doing is also helping your child to try and grow, because eventually, it's up to them completely, and they're going to need the tools and the resources to be able to then manage that. Or it could be that they don't know how to manage it and it just gets disappeared and blown up the wall.
Yeah. And look, I've seen parents do it in different ways. I mean, sometimes it's as simple as, I'm giving you this money, but one of the requirements is that you go seek financial advice, and that you go see a financial advisor to decide on how you best structure it, so that they make sure that there's an unbiased person that's able to support that child. Sometimes it's, I'm not actually giving you this money. I'm giving you this parcel of shares, so that you get an understanding of what dividends are, what franking credits are, how shares work. And so you're passing not just something that can help them financially, but something that's going to educate them and create, another means for some financial literacy. Sometimes it's helping without actually giving money at all. Financially helping without giving money at all. So some parents, some parents we see is, hey, I'm going to drop down from working 5 days a week to, maybe working 3 days a week, and I'll babysit for 2 days a week so that you don't need to pay childcare costs for, 2 days a week. Maybe it's being a guarantor on a loan if you don't necessarily have the ability to help them financially, but you still want to be able to support. So there are other ways that you can offer financial support without offering money.
And it could even be something as simple. You're absolutely right. And this is probably on a smaller scale, but it still has impact, is doing things like, hey, we're going to cook, and 2 nights a week, come swing past, grab the food or drop it off over the weekend. And we know that a couple of days a week, they're your late nights at work or whatever it may be. Everybody's different, but they're 2 times that you don't have to worry about or think about what you're going to cook. So it could be, not only are we helping from a time perspective to buy you back some time, so you're not running around like a headless chook, but we're also maybe saving you a little bit in terms of grocery costs because, we're going to buy enough to cook extra and then give it to you. Or the other thing, a lot of families do like family dinners and bits and pieces. So there's 1,000 different ways to do this. I don't think there's a right or wrong, and it's just working out what works for everybody. When we're talking decent amounts of money, we just advocate for advice because it can get quite complex, and you want to make sure that you absolutely nail this because it's easy to get it wrong. And then you start to get into, some territories. Maybe you're paying too much tax. Maybe you haven't got the right structure and different bits and pieces like that. But get advice and get it done and enjoy retirement.
Yeah, exactly right. Bills, I think that covers it nicely. So thanks again for another great podcast.
Yeah, thank you, Andrew. And to our listeners and our viewers, hope you got a whole heap of value out of that. Like always, details are in the show notes if you wanted to reach out to Andrew and myself. If you enjoyed that, please like, subscribe, share, pass on to your family and friends. Episode 200.
I was going to say, happy 200 episodes, Billy.
Thank you, Andrew. And guys, we look forward to catching you on the next one.
See you later.
Thanks for listening today. If you have any questions on what we talked about or would like to have a chat about your money journey, visit us at 360fs.com.au.
The information in this podcast is general in nature and does not take into account your personal objectives, financial situation, or needs. It is not financial, legal, or tax advice and should not be relied upon as such. You should consider whether the information is appropriate to your circumstances and seek professional advice before acting on any of the information provided. Past performance is not a reliable indicator of future performance. This information is provided by Billy Amaritis and Andrew Nicolaou of 360 Financial Strategists Proprietary Limited, authorised representatives and credit representatives of Acumen Financial Planning Proprietary Limited.